So, what's the driving dynamics of the 3008 like? Well, surprisingly good. As I'm driving over these, frankly, terrible roads in southern Adelaide, the ride is actually really, really good. It absorbs the bumps very, very well, and it accepts the, frankly, atrocious surface quite well. It's not jittery, it doesn't make me want to lurch and jump around. It does well, very well. Yes, this is their idea of a joining road. Boing. Patchwork quilt of surfaces everywhere. But, crucially, the Peugeot handles it well. For now we're on a smoother road, it doesn't wallow either. The one thing that really comes up about this car that I really, really like is the quality of the ride. It rides well. I mean, it's not as well poised as a saloon car would be, but for an SUV, it does very well for an SUV in terms of the ride quality. Although one thing I'm not a big fan of is this electric steering rack. It's sort of a bit vague at times. It doesn't quite give me the precision that I want from the manual rack. It's not bad. It's not the worst I've driven, not by a long shot, but it just needs a bit more feel to it. It's a little bit vague as I turn in. It turns well once it's in the corner, but it just needs a bit better turn in. However, for an SUV, it's fantastic. Having driven some of the rubbish in the modern SUV lot, this actually is quite good. Crap roads, crap ride, but handles it well. Crap roads, good ride, handles it well. Now, one thing I'm not as big fan of in this car, and any Euros for that matter, is the auto box. It just doesn't seem to be as fluid and smooth as I'd want it to be. In manual mode it's great, but as an auto, it's a typical Euro. This engine is designed to be a manual, and a manual only, and I can tell. Now, this car though really shines in manual mode. When I'm in control of it, this gearbox works very well. Don't like it when it tells me where to change gears, but in manual mode, it works really well. And that's the mode I'd like keeping it on. So, with these paddles here, which stay fixed, they don't follow the wheel around, and only one part actually moves, the rest of it's just a fixed piece of plastic. Interesting. Not the way many others do it, but interesting nonetheless. So, as a car to buy, this is shaping up to be quite a good car. And when you sit in this interior and you look at this dash, the way everything feels, the plastics, the soft touch plastics, the piano black, dark plastic inserts, and the tweed inserts on the doors and on the dashboard, this is a nice place to be. This is a nice place to sit. This is a nice place to be comfortable in. These seats, part leather, part tweed, part cloth, they're great to sit in. It's a car that you could happily drive hundreds of kilometers and be comfortable in. Like, seriously, this has to be one of the best kept secrets of the SUV market, because it's a decent car for the price where a whole bunch of shit boxes float around. It's a good car in an area that's dominated by clunkers. Even though the turn-in's a little bit understeery, it does hold the line well when you turn a corner. This is actually an interesting shopping centre in Adelaide. Amazing little bit of road. And this bit is actually quite nice. One thing that really annoys me with this car is the visibility out the back. Now, thank goodness it has a rear view camera, because if you didn't have that, you'd be pretty stuck. There's not so much in the 3/4 visibility as a problem with some of the other cars, because you have the 3/4 window. But out the back, out the boot, judging where the back of the car is, you haven't got much in the way of visibility, so you do need that rear view camera to actually see where you are going. If I was in the market for a small, medium SUV, I'd really consider this. And having seen what the others are charging in the Germans and Audi, BMW and Mercedes, yeah, I'd buy this over one of them. I'd also buy this over one of the more mainstream offerings too. Because having driven a Sportage, driven the RAV, driven the X-Trail, between those three offerings and this, I'd take this every day of the week. Because the car just feels like a better finished car. It doesn't feel like it's been slapped together with offcuts of plastic and nylon and cobbled together and sold to morons that think that it's a good deal. It's not the fastest thing in the world though. And I really do mean that. It isn't the fastest thing in the world. But, you know, I'm not upset about that. Because that's not what this car is meant to be. It's meant to be smooth and comfortable, and that's what it does very well. It's cut out this image for itself of being a car that's more comfortable, more refined, more relaxed. And that's a good thing. It's different. It does feel like a car that is very comfortable to drive. It's very comfortable to ride in. It's got this interesting dashboard. It's everything I would want from something of this class. And again, as a long distance car, it's really good. The only thing I don't like is the fact that the Australian importer likes to rip us off with parts. I mean, we're being blatantly ripped off. Those parts aren't that expensive. And this should be a volume car. By all intents and purposes, Peugeot in this country should be selling as a volume brand. Not the different exclusive thing. You make people think it's expensive when really it's not. And what I see here is a lot of the Euro importers, because of the European cars are a bit different, a bit unusual, they like to make you pay for that privilege, which I think is stupid, which I think is just robbery and profiteering, and ultimately deflates the sales of these cars. I haven't seen that many 3008s on the road, and also it might have had to do with the previous one being sort of this MPV, cum SUV, ugly piece of shit, which it was, and nobody really liked it. I do understand the perception of it being expensive, the perception of it being unreliable, and maybe that might be true for some of the Frenchies, but where they are now, where they were 15 years ago, near the bottom of the reliability survey, I can understand that. But now, these cars aren't too bad. We've had a bit of a renaissance with French cars. Over the last 10 years, they've become a lot better built. They've become a lot more reliable. These cars, these French cars, are becoming better, like they were back in the 80s and the 90s. Every car, every group has its good and bad periods, and France had their bad period. But I do think these are on the up. If you want a petrol-powered SUV, you need to consider this thing. It would be if you're going to look at any SUV, mid-size, if you've got to drive this car. Got to drive a 3008. You've got to take one of these for a drive. Because I think you'll be surprised at what this thing is. You'll be surprised at how good it is. And it'll make you think, maybe it's okay to be different. Maybe it's okay to buy a car that is different. It's stylish. It's comfortable. It feels well made. It's the sort of thing you would ask of other cars, not so much a Peugeot. And this looks like it will take on not only the Germans, but the Japanese and the Koreans, and it'll fare better than most of them in terms of dynamics, polish, and comfort. The quality of this car is to be commended. For a company that was producing crap 15 years ago, this is a car that you should be very, very proud of Peugeot. One thing that is for certain about this car, though, as good as it is as a car, you have to ask yourself, would one buy one? Let's take the differences and ideas out of it. Let's judge it for how much it costs for what you get. And the car you're looking at here is a 3008 Active. Now, list price for this thing in its spec as it now stands is $54,990. That is top end RAV4, top end X-Trail, Beyond X-Trail, top end Forester. That's top end money for most of the mainstream SUVs, and bottom end for things like the Audi Q3, BMW X2, Mercedes GLB. Now, where does this stack up? It stacks up quite well, although you think if Peugeot priced these things 5 or 10 grand less and put it in the high 40s, it'd stack up even better. But as a car, if you judged it by how it drove, how it felt, how it was built, against the other Euros, it stacks up really well. Against the Japanese and the Koreans, well, they are a bit cheaper, but the car you're getting isn't as nice to drive. So, yeah, against a GT line Sportage, I'd think about this car most certainly. And given the fact that you can get these in stock, that might push you over the edge to buy the Peugeot. But if you do feel like you were a bit fancier and want the higher end one, there's a GT line for 63 grand. And the GT 3008, again, that doesn't make as much sense. 63 grand, we're starting to push it here a bit. 56, 54, I can see it, but I could see it a whole lot more at 45 or 50. So, it's a great car, and I think you should drive it, you should go look at it. But, as to what this car is for what you get, well, I do believe that it is a bit high on the money side. Although, having said that, compared to that GLA that you've seen earlier, it's a lot better. Over a 3-year-old GLA, I'd take the brand new Peugeot. And again, if you want something that's a bit different, a bit unusual, it's a good car. It's definitely a car that I'd consider. For the money that it's being offered at, I'd be a little bit more keen to bargain with them, given that Peugeots don't tend to sell well. So if you get this at a good time, you probably could get it for 50 grand, and for that money, it makes a lot of sense. The only problem with this car is its sister, the Citroën C5 Aircross. I see a lot of good deals on Aircrosses. I see Aircrosses going for under 50 grand. And the Aircross is a bit more interesting to look at, a bit more individual on the inside, and has a really, really nice feeling seats. Those seats are wonderful to sit in. The biggest problem with the 3008 is its sister. Now, the Peugeot, if you're climbing out of an Audi, a BMW or a Mercedes, this is probably more your thing. You like the odd and weirdness of French cars, like I do, then the Aircross is more your thing. So I would say you should pop over and visit the Aircross and the 3008. If you're going for an SUV, you should look at them. You really, really should. You owe it to yourself to at least have a look at these cars. You don't have to buy them, just take a look and see what it is. Have a sniff, have a feel, have a drive, because you'll be pleasantly surprised. Other things I like about this Peugeot is this center console is huge. You can put anything in here. It's massive. Also, when you reverse, it even shows you where the car is located looking down. Sort of a bird's view location of you trying to park it. Again, clever ideas this car has. You wonder why you don't see more of these on the road. The problem is, this isn't going to appeal to the average buyer of a mid-size SUV. People who buy those cars, one thing I've noticed about a lot of them, given how well they sell in South Australia, is there are a lot of fundamentally insecure types that buy them because everyone else has one. If I don't have one and I have something else, I look like I'm out of place. You look at the cars, the psychology of the people who drive them. How do you buy a car that drives so badly? It's very simple. Because everyone else is. Because they're common. And because they're cheap. They look cheap, they feel cheap, and they don't feel like they're being ripped off. Whereas the car looks good. It's much too good for me. I need something worse. That's the mindset Australian car buyers have. So, as good as this car is, and I mean it is a great car, it won't succeed because it's too good. The average SUV buyer does not want interesting things, does not want anything that's unusual, does not want a car that is good. They want a bad car. They want a car that everyone owns, that they think is cheap, that is relatively fuel efficient, they think is cheap to buy, they think it's cheap to run, and they think that, well, good enough. It's good enough. Everything I hate about cars, they love. And that is why, much as I love the Peugeot, I doubt it's going to sell the numbers it should. In this country, there should be more. If Peugeot Australia were half smart with their marketing and their parts pricing, there would be more. But they're not. And your average loser that drives at 20 under the speed limit or 10 under the speed limit, that doesn't know how to merge, that drives with their hands over the wheel, isn't going to buy this. They're going to go and buy a RAV4, an X-Trail, an Outlander, or a CR-V instead and go, yes, this is the car for me.